For decades, America has watched Africa through a lens of poverty, conflict, and endless need. We've seen the charity appeals, the crisis coverage, the stories that always seem to end the same way, with hands reaching out, waiting for help from somewhere else. But something extraordinary is happening right now. Something that's going to change not just Africa, but the entire balance of global power. And most Americans have no idea it's even taking place. Picture this. For 3 intense days, presidents from across the African continent gathered in one room, not for another aid conference, not to discuss debt relief or foreign assistance. They came together with the CEOs of major tech companies and Africa's brightest young innovators to do something that once seemed impossible. They announced a plan that by 2030, just 5 years from now, all 54 African countries will merge into one single digital marketplace, one connected economy, one unified technological force, spanning an entire continent of 1.4 billion people. And here's what should really get your attention. They're not asking for America's permission. They're not waiting for our approval. And they're building this future with or without us. Now, you might be wondering why this matters to you. Why should someone living in Des Moines, or Phoenix, or Miami care about digital markets in Africa? Well, let me paint you a picture of what the world is going to look like when this transformation is complete. Because whether we're paying attention or not, the global order we've known for the past 70 years is being rewritten right before our eyes. The summit took place in Conakry, and it was called the Transform Africa Summit. This wasn't the first of these gatherings. It was actually the 7th, but this one was different. This time, the talk wasn't just about dreams and possibilities. This time, concrete plans were unveiled. Billions of dollars in commitments were made. Technology partnerships were signed. And the organization leading this charge, Smart Africa, now has 42 African nations as members. That's nearly 80% of the continent moving in lockstep toward a single goal. Think about what that means for a moment. America has struggled for years to get our own states to agree on basic things like driver's license standards or voting systems. Europe spent decades building its common market and still argues constantly about regulations. But Africa is attempting to create a unified digital economy across 54 different countries, each with its own language, currency, legal system, and political structure, and they're trying to do it in just 5 years. The vision itself echoes something from Africa's past. When African nations won their independence in the 1962, leaders like Kwame Nkrumah dreamed of a truly united Africa with one government, one military, one currency. That dream never materialized. The Cold War got in the way. Colonial borders stayed frozen in place. National interests pulled countries apart instead of together. But now, instead of political unity, Africa is pursuing something potentially more powerful: digital unity. And the technology to make it happen finally exists. Let me break down what they're actually building, because the details matter here. The centerpiece is something called a single digital market. Right now, if you're a business owner in Kenya trying to sell products to customers in Nigeria, you face a nightmare of different regulations, different payment systems, different digital infrastructure that doesn't talk to each other. It's like trying to do business between the United States and China, except these countries are neighbors. But in this new system, one business registration will work across dozens of countries. One digital identity will let citizens access services anywhere on the continent. One set of rules will govern digital commerce from Cairo to Cape Town. They're building this on 3 major technological pillars. The first is called SANIA, which stands for the Smart Africa Network of Incubators and Accelerators. Think of it as a continent-wide support system for tech startups and innovators. A young programmer in Rwanda can now receive mentorship from experts in Egypt, funding from investors in South Africa, and immediately access customers across 20 different countries, all through one connected network. For the first time, Africa is building a true innovation ecosystem, not 54 separate small tech scenes, but one massive, coordinated engine for technological development. The second pillar is the Smart Africa Data Exchange, and this is where things get really interesting from a geopolitical standpoint. For years, American tech giants like Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple have been collecting massive amounts of data from African users. That data gets processed on servers in California or Virginia, and American companies profit from it while Africans see almost nothing in return. It's digital colonialism by another name, and Africans are finally saying enough. The data exchange will allow African countries to share data securely with each other while keeping it under African control. In today's economy, data is oil, it's gold, it's power, and Africa just decided it wants to own its own resources instead of giving them away. The third pillar is continental digital ID, and this might be the most transformative piece of all. Imagine if every American had one secure digital identity that worked for everything: your driver's license, passport, medical records, bank accounts, tax returns, all protected but instantly accessible wherever you needed it. Now imagine that identity worked not just across all 50 states, but across an entire continent. That's what Africa is building. With this digital ID, an ordinary African citizen will be able to travel across borders, start businesses, access healthcare, make payments, all without the usual paperwork and barriers that have kept Africa fragmented for generations. Now here's where the artificial intelligence part comes in, and this is crucial. The entire summit was themed around AI for Africa, and the emphasis was on two words that should worry every American tech executive: innovate locally. For too long, Africa has been importing technology built in Silicon Valley, or Shenzhen. Technology that doesn't speak African languages, doesn't solve African problems, and doesn't serve African interests first. But AI changes that equation completely. With artificial intelligence, African engineers can build tools in Swahili, Hausa, Amharic, Igbo, Zulu, Arabic, and hundreds of other languages. They can create agricultural AI that understands African climate patterns and crop diseases. They can develop medical AI trained on African health data to catch diseases that primarily affect African populations. They can build financial AI designed for mobile money systems and informal economies, not Western banking structures. In other words, Africa isn't just trying to catch up to American and Chinese technology anymore. They're leapfrogging it entirely by building the next generation of AI tools designed specifically for their context. And those tools will work better for the billion people in Africa than anything we could export to them. Let me tell you who the real winners are here. Because it's not just governments and tech companies. The biggest beneficiaries will be ordinary people. Right now, sending money from Kenya to Nigeria can take days and cost a fortune in fees. In a unified digital system, that transfer becomes instant and nearly free, just like texting. A small shop owner in Ghana who today can barely sell beyond her neighborhood will suddenly have access to customers in 40+ countries. A farmer in rural Tanzania will be able to use his phone to check real-time market prices, get weather predictions, diagnose crop diseases, and arrange sales directly with buyers 3 countries away, no middlemen taking their cut. For young people especially, this opens up opportunities that simply didn't exist before. A software developer in Senegal can work on projects in Egypt without visa complications. A fintech startup in Nigeria can launch simultaneously in South Africa, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Morocco. African talent, which has been trapped behind borders and bureaucracy for generations, will finally be able to move freely, at least digitally, and compete on a continental scale. There's also a human dignity aspect here that Americans should understand. For years, Africans have needed stacks of paperwork, multiple IDs, complicated registrations, just to access basic services or cross borders within their own continent. The digital ID system changes that. One secure identity that works everywhere. It's faster, more efficient, and it treats people with respect instead of suspicion. But let's talk about the challenges, because this vision is ambitious to the point of being audacious, and there are serious obstacles ahead. First, there's the infrastructure problem. Even though mobile phones are everywhere in Africa now, reliable high-speed internet is not. Many rural areas still lack stable connectivity. Power grids are unreliable in some regions. Data centers are concentrated in just a few countries. For a unified digital market to actually work for everyone, Africa needs massive infrastructure investment in fiber optic cables, 5G networks, electricity generation, and server farms. That's billions of dollars and years of construction. Second, there's the policy challenge. Right now, every African country has different laws about data privacy, cybersecurity, digital payments, and online commerce. Some have strict regulations, others have barely any. For this single market to function, all these countries need to harmonize their rules. They need to agree on standards. They need to trust each other's systems. That requires diplomacy, negotiation, and political courage, especially when it means giving up some national control for continental benefit. That's never easy, even with the best intentions. Third, and this is critical, there's cybersecurity. As Africa becomes more digital and more connected, it becomes a much bigger target for hackers, criminals, and hostile foreign governments. A unified system is efficient, but it's also vulnerable. One major breach could compromise millions of people across multiple countries. Africa needs to build its own robust cyber defenses, train its own security experts, and develop its own protocols instead of relying on foreign companies or foreign governments to protect African systems. That's a massive undertaking that requires expertise, funding, and time. But here's the thing. Despite all these challenges, the opportunity is absolutely enormous, and that's what has the rest of the world sitting up and paying attention. A connected digital market of 1.4 billion people would be one of the largest unified economies on Earth. It would be bigger than Europe, bigger than the entire United States, more populous than India, and far younger. The median age in Africa is 19 years old. Compare that to 38 inches America, 43 inches Europe, 49 inches Japan. Africa isn't just big, it's young, it's growing, and it's hungry for opportunity. For American businesses, this creates both opportunity and competition. On one hand, a unified African market is a massive customer base for American products and services. On the other hand, African companies will finally be able to scale up and compete globally in ways they never could before. An African streaming service could challenge Netflix. An African social network could compete with Facebook. African mobile payment systems, which are already more advanced than ours in many ways, could become global standards. We Americans like to think we're at the cutting edge of everything, but Africa is about to prove that assumption wrong in some very important sectors. From a geopolitical perspective, this changes everything. For decades, America has had enormous influence in Africa, along with European powers like France and Britain. More recently, China has invested heavily across the continent, building roads, railways, and telecommunications networks in exchange for resources and political influence. But a unified digital Africa doesn't need to choose sides the way 54 separate countries do. Instead, Africa becomes a unified bloc that can negotiate as equals with America, China, Europe, India, and anyone else. That shifts the entire global power balance. Think about data again for a moment. American tech companies have been collecting African data for years and using it to train AI systems that benefit primarily American businesses. But when Africa controls its own data through the Smart Africa Data Exchange, that flow reverses. African AI companies will train on African data. African businesses will profit from African digital activity. And if American companies want access to that massive market and that valuable data, they'll have to negotiate on terms that benefit Africa, not just Silicon Valley shareholders. There's also the question of currency and finance. Right now, most international trade in Africa happens in dollars or euros. African countries hold their reserves in dollars. They borrow in dollars. They're dependent on American and European financial systems. But a unified digital market opens the door to Pan-African digital currencies, regional payment systems, and financial infrastructure that doesn't run through New York or London. That reduces American influence and reduces Africa's vulnerability to our sanctions and our policy decisions. Whether you think that's good or bad depends on your perspective, but it's definitely significant. By 2030, if this vision succeeds, the world will look very different. Imagine an African citizen moving from Accra to Kigali and using the same digital ID to access healthcare, banking, and government services in both places. Imagine a teacher in Botswana instantly paying a supplier in Tunisia with no fees and no delays. Imagine African-made AI tools being used in schools and hospitals across the continent, finally delivered in local languages and designed for local needs. Imagine a two-year-old entrepreneur in Banjul building an app that instantly reaches users in 30 African countries and generates millions in revenue. This isn't science fiction. This is the future Africa is actively building right now, today, while most Americans are completely unaware it's even happening. And here's what we need to understand. A connected digital Africa doesn't just reshape that continent, it reshapes the entire global order. It creates a new center of economic power, technological innovation, and geopolitical influence in a part of the world that has been counted out and overlooked for far too long. The question for America is simple. Are we going to engage with this new reality as partners and equals, or are we going to wake up one day and find ourselves on the outside looking in, wondering how we missed one of the biggest transformations of the 21st century? The choice is ours, but the clock is ticking, and Africa isn't waiting around for us to decide.